Hello, my name is Patrick Perez, and today I'm here to refute David Perez's speech on California's water drought. However, due to the lack of direct claims within his presentation, my aim will be to dismiss and diminish his argument. I will be addressing his lack of organization and how it led to a poor argument, how his information offered little support to advance his claims, and how his claim of fact became lost within his speech. Mr. Perez began his claim very strong. He offered a small preview of his points, and he briefly described his terms, mainly what desalinization is and its role in fighting California's drought. After a somewhat lengthy explanation of the issue itself, he presents his secondary claims as follows. 1. Desalinization can provide enough water for California's needs. 2. Obtaining outside resources will resolve fundamental issues. And 3. Raising money for projects and research will also help fight the drought. However, almost immediately after this, Mr. Perez begins to jump around on his ideas, failing to put together an argument that builds upon itself. Instead, David continues to define his terms and explain the various aspects of California's water drought while avoiding any real contributions to further his claim. It is at this point in his speech that David abandons any real assertions. Instead, he begins to offer and analyze other solutions to California's water drought. Mr. Perez explains initially that he will focus his argument around the drought, but more specifically how desalinization alone will combat the drought effectively. However, instead we only receive information on resources outside California, causes and concerns of desalinization, and how our current system is halting any progress towards fighting drought. While this information may help the audience understand the bigger picture, it really is unnecessary because it does nothing to further the claim that desalinization of water will resolve California's drought. Mr. Perez repeatedly failed to address his claim, burying it under loads of information on desalinization itself, as opposed to explaining how its implementation would affect California's drought. All the information he cited in his speech failed to advance his claim. Instead, the audience received an explanation on the desalinization process and its pros and cons. While explaining the pros benefited him greatly, he instantly cut himself short by defining the severe and common issues associated with the process. Once again, the audience was left with an abundance of information but no direction or stance. In addition, David continually failed to present some form of context when addressing his findings, weakening his research's effectiveness. In conclusion, Mr. Perez offered a sound disposition, however failed to assert a claim. His lack of context and structure created a confusing and unclear sense of reasoning, ultimately leading to a poor argument. Thank you.
Ouch.
This man is incompetent. I steal the hard work.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't that bad.
All right, Patrick, primarily your presentation is a critique of the speech rather than a refutation of the speech. And I thought, in some ways there is some accuracy in your argument about the problems with advancing those secondary claims. Instead, we get background information on desalinization. My memory of it reflects a lot of the things that you talked about. I do think, though, that you need to say on those particular claims, well, let's look at his individual claims. Desalinization can reduce or solve our problems. So what evidence did he offer in support of this? And the answer is he only explained what desalinization was and talked about what some of the pros are. How much water does California need? How much is it short? In the current water crisis, that sort of thing is never discussed. Does he ever offer any information about how desalinization could meet that need, especially within the time period of the drought, for instance? And of course, there's a discussion of drawbacks. I don't remember if it came up in his argument. I know it didn't come up in your argument. What's the cost going to be in order to do these sorts of things? I think that's probably one of the barriers. If we could just reach into the Pacific Ocean and help ourselves to water, we wouldn't have any trouble with water issues. The problem is doing this costs a lot of money, and it raises the cost of water substantially. So infrastructure is going to be different, and I don't know how much food is going to cost if we have to water it with desalinized water, but I imagine it's going to be a substantial issue. So I think that's probably one of the things that you could go after a little bit and requires you to do a little bit of extra research. I think that you kind of took, I don't want to say the soft path, but the convenient path here. Let me look at what he said and just point out that it doesn't really prove that particular point, instead of showing why there's a good reason to doubt that that point is valid. So you kind of criticize the absence of evidence and therefore a problem with the reasoning that goes on with it. But there's not much explanation about why, in the long run, this couldn't work. Which I think, so it's a missed opportunity. The criticisms of the presentation, sometimes I think they're perfectly valid, sometimes they seem a little over the top, but the idea that it was difficult to discern what conclusion we should draw, that's an important argument to make, and I thought that that was a reasonable way of presenting it. All right, thank you.